Have you ever read When Chickenheads Come Home to Roost by Joan Morgan? I've been meaning to read this book for over a decade, and I never quite got around to it. I wanted to read it in college, and I just, I don't know, I just didn't. And so I finally got an opportunity to read it, and it's good. It's a great conversation from someone who was clearly a teenager in the late 80s, and specifically a Black American woman who was a teenager in the late 80s, who grew up when hip hop was entering its teenage years itself, or very much a teenager itself. And so talking about Black womanism and talking about how we're raised to care for everyone else in the Black community, but does the Black community turn around and truly care for us? It's a conversation that she has many answers for in the book that you should read. And she says a lot of different things, actually. It's a really good read from start to finish. And one of the concepts in there that I just find so fascinating, well, two of them. Number one, the book itself is something like, from her perspective, a time capsule. For me, it's a time capsule of the state of play of hip hop and Black American culture in the late 90s. And as a Black American woman who was a teenager in the late 90s, some of the things that she was talking about as an adult, I can now kind of color it a little differently, experiencing those things as a teenager in the late 90s. And I think the other thing that strikes me is just how timely this conversation is, because one of the things she spends a lot of time on is throughout, and it's not like it's not redundant, it's just a theme that comes up, is the reproductive freedom that she enjoyed, that her mother and her mother's sisters and the women of her mother's generation did not enjoy. And it's interesting because to read that in the time that we're in now, in the United States, where the reproductive landscape does not look the same anymore, and in fact it looks very similar to what her mother and her mother's generation was experiencing, is something interesting. And then also, I find it interesting because I don't remember when we started talking about Black women mortality rates as it relates to childbirth, but she begins to talk about the fact that Black women are raised, and I agree, Black women are raised to take care of everyone, but who's really taking care of us? And that Black men and women are, for the most part, one is not receiving more negative treatment because of the capitalist society we live in than the other, but there's just more data on people who identify as Black males. And in that conversation, she doesn't bring up the mortality rate. What we know now is that one of the things that Black women disproportionately are experiencing is mortality through childbirth more than anyone else, for a myriad reasons. And I thought it was curious because I don't know when we started to talk about it, but I'm glad that we are talking about that as a way to change the outcomes. It's just, anyway, that's just a few of the things that popped out to me, but it's an overall really good read. One of these days I might start a book club, but for now I'll just keep talking about all the books that I've fallen in love with and engage from there. But